Hey everyone, it's Sean from Crafted Elements, and today's video we're going to be looking at our textured quad coaster molds. And here at Crafted Elements we have a ridiculous amount of coaster molds. We've got coaster molds that are 4 per mold in a square shape, in a circular shape, in a hexagon shape that are all 1 inch deep, so they're really deep molds. We've even got like 20 coaster molds, so if you want to do 20 coasters at a time, if you're a resin artist and you're making a bunch for a show or for sale or whatever, we have coaster molds that literally have 20 different pockets in both squares and circles. The other thing we have is longboard molds. If you wanted to make a set of wood and resin coasters, you'd probably use one of these because you put your wood in, partial wood in, fill the rest with resin, and you demold it, and you've got a long board. You run that long board through your planer, and then you chop it up into 4 sections, and you've got 4 by 4 inch coasters. Why would you use this to make a wood and resin set of coasters instead of one of our other coaster molds? It really comes down to planing ability. If you're using one of our small coaster molds, like a circle or a square, and putting wood and resin in it, it'll certainly work. But if you want to run that through the planer, it gets a little tricky because it's such a small piece, 4 by 4, 5 by 5, that your planer can often shoot them out the other end if you don't actually bond them to a piece of plywood first. So it gets a little bit tricky to plane those things, which is why they're kind of more for just resin only. So the molds I want to talk about today, however, are our newest quad coaster molds. And we just simply say quad coaster because it means 4 coasters per single mold. The ones we're looking at is our new mermaid scale mold, which is a circular coaster. I think it's 4 inches diameter, 1/2 inch deep, and it's actually got embedded mermaid scales or textured mermaid scales on it. The other mold we're looking at as well is our hexagon inlay mold. So it's a hexagon shape, obviously, and then there's a hexagon pattern in it, which is going to be cool for making a variety of resin things. But if you want to make like beehive coasters, for example, that'd be a perfect mold to use. I'm actually going to demo these right now, as you can see how these textured coaster molds work. So now that you've got a better view of them, you can actually see that there's very deep grooves in here. These are actual engraved blanks or tooling that we make here in house to make these things. So you do have quite a bit of depth, and that allows you to actually individually fill these cavities with different colors of resin. Same thing here. This one's got a little bit of a different finish on it because of the way we make the tooling. This one's got like almost like an orange peel type effect, so it's got a different layer. It's still glossy like this other one, but it has just a different finish on the actual surface of the tooling, which translates to the surface of the mold. But either way, both are glossy, both are 1/2 inches deep, and both are going to make some very cool coasters. So if you want to attempt a project, you can certainly fill these very easily with a single color, pop them out and be done. Or you could fill them, take them out, and then backfill all these little lines with one of these. Or you can do the inverse, which is what I'm going to do in this video. I'm going to fill up a bunch of these little bottles with various types of, same type of resin, but various colors. And I'm going to alternate the colors here, and I'm going to actually just use some yellow inserts at random and then backfill this in black after. So stay with me so you can just see how cool it is to make multicolored resin coasters with these molds. So I've got my gloves on. I'm going to go ahead and turn my fans and exhaust on because I'm not wearing a mask in here. Obviously, if you can and you're not creating a video and trying to talk to someone, you should be wearing a respirator when you're mixing up resin. Now, I've selected Total Bolt's Maker Epoxy because these are very shallow pores. We're not doing, although we could do the entire 1/2 inch depth with Maker Epoxy right now, we are just really doing the colored sections, which is like at most a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch. So it's a very small amount of resin in these pockets. So this is perfectly fine. You could use really any art epoxy or tabletop epoxy. But again, we've got Total Bolt Maker Epoxy here, which is good for this application. I'm going to mix it up here. It's a 1:1 ratio. Then I'm going to distribute it amongst our bottles with some different black diamond pigments, just so each bottle has a different colored pigment that we can essentially use like an art brush to basically inject epoxy into each one of those things. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward this part because you do not want to see me mixing epoxy and resin. I'm pretty sure you know how to do that already. Stay tuned when we actually get to the fun part. So I've mixed up our Maker Epoxy, put it in these little 4-ounce bottles, which you can get from Amazon. They're like little mini ketchup bottles, condiment bottles. And I've mixed in some black diamond pigments, 4 different colors. We're gonna be using these mermaid scale, I don't wanna be sexist, these girly colors over here on the mermaid project. And we're gonna be using yellow, Tuscan Sunset for the black and yellow beehive project. So we're gonna go ahead and switch camera angles so you can see what I do here. Right before we pour our resin, we're gonna wanna spray our molds with our mold release. All silicone molds need a mold release, whether it's ours or cheap imported Amazon ones, whatever. You need to use a mold release, a proper mold release, like the Man 200, 300, or the MG Chemicals 8329, which are non-silicone based mold releases with silicone molds. They will make your molds last longer, you'll prevent tear out, so on and so forth. The Man 200 has a semi-gloss finish, whereas the 300 has more of a gloss finish. So our coasters are actually gonna turn out a little bit more semi-gloss than gloss because of the 200 release. If I wanted like perfectly polished type coasters, like glass-like out of it, I'd use a 300. But I'm gonna go ahead and spray this and just make sure you get good coverage on all the interiors of the mold. Now, mold release is dry. It's really important that you don't want to just spray it and then start pouring. You definitely need to let that mold release dry. I'm gonna go ahead and start with our honeycomb one, which is again gonna have that black and yellow pattern. And I'm just gonna kind of randomly select pockets of honey, so to speak, where a theoretical bee has filled up some and left some of the other honeycomb. Okay, happy with that. I'm gonna go over here now, and what I'm gonna be doing is a gradient. I'm gonna go from dark to light or light to dark. So essentially pink, blue, purple, kind of going down the middle. The last thing I'm going to do with this one is just to make that gradient work a little bit more, where I mixed in blue and pink to some of these, this layer, and actually mix that color, and I'm just going to kind of twirl it in a little bit to start to mix in that pigment. Because the one thing about this art epoxy, maker epoxy, is it actually doesn't really color mix, which is a good thing. That's what you want. You don't want an art epoxy that's going to like kind of blend all your colors together. But unless you want to, which is what I'm doing here. So I'm actually just gonna do a little quick mix, which is gonna help that faded effect. That was kind of fun. It kind of reminds me of like a paint by numbers puzzle here. I'm gonna let this epoxy set. Maker epoxy actually sets up pretty quickly. It takes, a few days to cure, but it sets up within probably 4 or 5 hours. But I'm gonna let it set overnight anyway. We'll come back tomorrow, we'll pour the back layer on, and then we'll demold them after that. We are back the next morning, and our first layer of Total Boat Maker epoxy is fully dried, set, and we can put our back layers on to kind of tie it all together. So I've pre-mixed our Total Boat Maker epoxy. I've added some black diamond iridescent blue for the base layer that we're going to do in the mermaid coasters, and some black diamond black onyx that we are going to do on the back of our honeycomb coasters. Very simple. Anybody else hear that? Black layer down, blue layer on our coaster, our mermaid coasters, which I think is going to look stellar when it's done. Beauty. All right, guys, not much to it. We've got to wait another day for this to fully set up. We'll demold them, and we can see just how cool these coasters came out. The back layer on these is now fully set, so I'm going to go ahead and demold them. Let's do the black and yellow honeycomb one first. Ooh, super easy demold, obviously, because that's what we do here at Crafted Elements. Okay, Bloop. Ready to use again. Very, very cool mermaid coasters. Ah, very sleek. Happy with how these turned out. What do you guys think? Now, for all intents and purposes, we could technically consider these done. But you'll obviously notice that because of the mold and because of those relief patterns, we've got all those lines in here. As a coaster, I mean, I guess it's probably a good thing if you spill on it, it catches the liquid. But if you're one of those people who want, you know, a perfectly flat coaster, everything at the same level, we have a couple of options here. You could do the whole mini ketchup bottle method, fill this with resin, and then literally paint in all these things, all these lines. You're not going to have it perfectly level, but that also gives you the opportunity to put another color in these coasters should you wish. The other option would be to do a flood coat. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm not going to flood coat these, but to demonstrate the flood coat method, I'm going to flood coat these and make them kind of all level. So the first thing we actually need to do is rough them up. I know they're so pretty and glossy and everything. We're going to take some 120 grit sandpaper, rough them up, set them up, tape them on the back, and then we'll pour some resin on them to flood coat them, just so you can kind of see the options. Like again, you are perfectly fine calling that done. You've got the grooves in there. Visually, it's very interesting. But, you know, you're the artist. You decide what you want to do. Fill the lines with resin, top coat the entire thing to make it perfectly flat. Either way, your choice. But let's get started on sanding these to top coat. We'll see it. Like some 120 grit sandpaper. I've got my vacuum on, my mask on. We are ready to sand. Got these all sanded up, blown off. I'm going to flip them over and we're just going to tape them up. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going to tape off the bottoms. Why am I doing that? Well, if you've ever flood coated a project, you know that the resin kind of goes underneath your project and then like drips and creates these drip marks. And they are a pain in the butt to sand off. So I prefer doing it this way because what I can do is put some tape down, some painter's tape or some tuck tape or whatever tape is relatively easily removable. Heat this up a little bit and peel all that drippage away. So this is just going to save you so much time. So when in doubt, if you're flood coating, tape the bottom perimeter. It will save you some time. Got my plastic down. It's always important to raise your pieces up because if you leave it on your plastic, well, if you've done this before, you know this is self-explanatory, but you're going to get all that resin stuck to the plastic and your piece. So you want to raise these up on something that's stable enough that it's not going to fall over while it's setting or drying. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up some top coating, flood coating resin. Now I'm going to use Total Boat Maker Epoxy. That's what we use for the rest of the coasters, but I could just use tabletop epoxy, any sort of art resin or tabletop resin works because it's just a very, very shallow, thin pour that's going to, a thin layer rather, that's going to come around and fill this guy up. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and mix that up and we'll start pouring. Resin is mixed up. There's a lot of air in it because I'm like an aggressive mixer, but luckily this stuff kind of degasses and debubbles itself, especially when it's a really thin coat. So it's going to look kind of bubbly when I put it on here, but once it really sets up, the bubbles will just kind of go away. And we're literally just going to pour it on and let the resin do its work. You might be asking, why did we sand these first? Why can't we just top coat them? And I guess you could, but in my experience, flood coating polished resin or like, you know, really shiny resin, I guess you could say, doesn't work out so well. It tends to like separate and cause these like voids when it's separating, or rather when it's setting. and you don't get a nice finish. So by roughing it up, it gives the resin something to kind of grip onto and hold onto, and you don't get that separation, those little dots and kind of inverse bubbles that if you've ever flood coated resin without sanding it, you know what I'm probably talking about. So just take my word for it that sanding these to at most 120 grit, or any resin project to at most 120 grit if you are going to flood coat it, is probably the best thing to do to get like a nice flood coat. Quickly hit this with my torch. Do not let the torch sit on the resin. Just very quickly wave it back and forth. Just got rid of a lot of those big bubbles. A lot of the little micro bubbles are still there, but they will release from the resin probably within the next half an hour. So what I'm going to do is stop the video here, and we'll come back and just take a quick look at the clarity as those bubbles seem to dissipate themselves. So now our top coat is dry. I can touch them without getting resin on my hands. The next step, or the final step, would simply be to trim off what's on the bottom, this tape. So you can see there's a bunch of little drips and stuff, but it's on the tape, and that's kind of the point. So I'm gonna put my respirator on, got my heat gun. You could use a torch for this too, but heat gun's probably the better control option. We're gonna heat this up and we're just gonna peel it away. So overall, I'd give this flood coat like a B+, maybe an A-. Partially my fault because I was working on some other projects here yesterday, and I think some dust kind of was floating around the shop. So there's a little bit of dust embedded in the actual flood coat. But luckily, I can just give these away to someone. We're not really in the business of selling resin art. We're in the business of selling amazing molds. So if you are looking to get one of our textured coaster molds or one of our other many mold formats, like I said, you have deep squares, deep circles, deep hexagons, 20 coasters, 4 coasters. We got a lot of molds for making coasters. Go to craftedelements.com/coasters. That will show you the entire list of coaster type molds that we offer. We also have coaster templates, and of course we have 200 plus other molds, 200 plus other templates as well. So if you are a maker or a woodworker and you're looking to save time and money and frustration and make your life easier, you're going to want to remember Crafted Elements, because we definitely have a product that will help you. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of these new textured coaster molds by commenting below. And if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, whatever you need to do. See you on the next one.